and welcome back. We're going to be finishing up this chapter and we're talking about some of the philosophies that influence or that have been the foundation of second language acquisition since, at least the 1930s and 40s and all the way up to today. We're going to start with a little history of the second language acquisition way back when B.F. Skinner was around and his famous description of language in verbal behavior. Anyway, let me begin by saying that this type of philosophy was behavioral in scope. They believed that your brain was a blank slate and it needed to be filled in, and that the way that you learned was simply listen and repeat, listen and repeat, listen and repeat. There was nothing going on in the brain. You simply learned something by mimicking it, like a parrot would type of thing. And they believe that's the way kids learned, and so there was this belief that you have this ability in your brain to remember stuff that's been memorized. There were no laws, there were no rules. It was just this structure that you had to put into your head. The only way you got that structure was kind of like the scientific method, where you do in trial by error. So there was no mind. It was very strongly influenced on the scientific method. And so that's all you did, was you listen and repeat it, listen and repeat it. And because of this philosophy, of course, they had some methods for teaching language. B.F. Skinner comes out with his book on verbal behavior, and he talks about this idea. And it becomes very popular, and based off of that, there were some teaching methods. It was a very, again, behavior modification is basically what it was. Kind of like, if you remember Pavlov's dogs, where there was behavior modification. You ring the bell, and the dogs start to salivate because they think it's time to eat. So one thing caused the other. There was no thinking that was going on. And that's how this type of philosophy was, and it lasted for a while. It was very big in its heyday, but something happened, and that was generative linguistics. In the 1960s, a gentleman by the name of Noam Chomsky and a number of his team began to analyze language and basically started writing articles and research papers that blew Skinner and his structuralist ideas out of the water. And what happened was they began to recognize that, as I've written here, linguistics, as is written here, generative linguistics is a school of thought within linguistics that makes use of this idea of generative grammar, generating grammar. Generative grammar is the concept that there are a specific set of rules that generate all possible sentences. What does this mean? It means that the brain wasn't just an empty slate, as they said back here in earlier philosophies. Okay? In the 1960s, they began to say, no, there are rules in the brain. And those rules can allow you to learn ways of generating sentences. Okay? Just some of the experiments that they did was that they took all these little kids and they started talking to them. And, they would show this kid something and they would say, well, this is a dweeble. You have one, I have two. How many do I have? Well, you have two dweebles. And they'd put an S on the end of that word. Well, who taught them that they're supposed to put an S at the end of that word? They never heard the word before, so how would they know how to make it plural? See, in their brain, there was this rule. And they used that rule to generate a new idea. Okay? And so they had these rules in their head. Chomsky then and his group are trying to explain what all this information is. He's trying to explain um, the psychological, the neurological abilities in the brain to create sentences. And what he believed was that there was this language acquisition device in the mind, this innate ability, this little, well, it wasn't a box, this imaginary box in the brain that had the capability of processing linguistic information and use it to activate the language capabilities in the brain. And his tests have shown, very much so, that there are these rules in the brain. And the results of their research kind of blew away anything that Skinner and his group were doing. So cognitive psychology is showing that more than just the stimulus response from the old group, from this group, more than that, the rationality of language, the meaning of language, is going to have more of an impact as far as learning language. So kids, basically what they're saying is kids are hardwired. When they're born, they're hardwired to generate and understand language. Doesn't matter what the language is. This language acquisition device, the LAD, is actually hardwired into everybody's brain. And it doesn't matter what the language is. The rules are there, and they can use those rules to generate the language that they need for their particular language. And this came out in the 1960s. Because of this, there was a huge boom in language teaching now to try to focus on ways to get students to activate this language acquisition device, ways to activate the rules that are innate within them. And so there was study that was going on in that field as well. Chomsky and his group are now trying to figure out what's going on in the brain. What's going on to create these languages, and so that's what they were investigating. Interesting, very interesting philosophy. Some other elements that were involved with generative linguistics was the idea of innateness. Again, language is inbred within us. Not the actual language, but the ability to learn language, the ability to process linguistic information. It's part of the brain, and the mind can use it, and typically does. Another concept is the concept of interlanguage. Whoops, that was a big miss there. Interlanguage. When you're learning a language, you try to develop rules in your head to be able to function within that language. But sometimes the rules that you create aren't correct. And so the language rules need to be not hard and fast. When students are learning a second language, they also have the same type of thing. They're trying to learn language, but the rules that are in their head need to be flexible. They have to have a language in between what I didn't know in the past and what's correct and that I will know eventually in the future. I've got to have this in-between interlanguage. So we as little kids, we have that. Again, I mentioned Pescetti. Or you hear a little kid who says, I teached that to him. No one explained, the idea of taught. So he's got an interlanguage. He's got a rule. ED makes past tense, but it's not used everywhere. He doesn't know this yet, so he's got to modify his rule eventually. That's why he has an interlanguage. Systematicity is the idea that language is a very systematic system. It's a very systematic component in the brain, and everything is organized in the brain and in language. It doesn't mean that it's optimal, but it is organized. There are reasons why things aren't. There are reasons why the passive teach isn't teached, but that's not because of the brain. That's more because of the evolution of language within culture, and we're not going to talk about that here. But language has a very systematic way of developing within the brain. Chomsky also talked about a universal language, and a universal language was the idea that any anyone with this language acquisition device could learn any other language, and that's because there was this universal structure, this universal code in the brain that allowed anyone to learn any language. So if you took a baby from the mountains of Papua New Guinea, took him from his tribe, and brought him to England to learn English, they'd be able to do that because the language in the language device is going to be universal. Lastly is deep structure. And deep structure is the idea that there is a deep, there is a, what's the idea here? There is a grammar that is foundational. There are a set of rules that are foundational to a language, but after that is learned, it allows for a variety of other types of structures to be developed. For example, I say to you, I threw the ball. I say to you, I threw the ball, but and that might be a sentence. But I can also say to you, the ball was thrown by me. And those two sentences basically mean the same thing. I threw the ball was thrown by me. And what Chomsky and his group would say was that they're basically the same sentence. The deep structure is the same. They're just being manifested differently because of the rules that are available. So this idea of deep structure is another component here. The 1970s, the 1980s, I guess. Actually, even before then, there developed this idea of a constructivism approach, this philosophy that was multidisciplinary. Basically, what is going on here is that people are saying, yes, there are these rules that are in your head, and we get that they have these rules, and you have this innate ability. However, there's also the need for other people. I do need to recognize that I have these rules in my head, but I can't create language unless there's other people around. And so there were other groups that were advocating or espousing the need to have not just one way of looking at second language acquisition, but it should be multimodal. It should be multiple sides. Vygotsky, for example, talked about the need for scaffolding, scaffolding on a building to help develop it. Okay, Vygotsky called scaffolding was kind of like the come alongside and to help somebody type of socially imbued language learning. So we've got this idea of scaffolding and people helping others learn language until they're no longer needed. Vygotsky talked about the zone of proximal development, and it was how people can learn more and do more if they get help. The zone of proximal development is the difference between what a learner can do without help and what they can do with help. So with help, a learner is going to do more. That's that person outside, right? Bakhtin talked about the need of the other, and that we are not alone. We do not live or study or learn in a vacuum. Any of the ideas we have are somehow related to ideas that come from other people. So we learn from these other people in order to create or emerge or develop new ideas. Piaget, who studied his I think it was his grandkids, talked about a cognitively discovered approach. That reason and learning from little kids, they discover these things. So they discover language just by playing with it. They discover how to do things, and their brain begins to develop them that way because they're discovering it. They're going out and playing with it. And again, and to do that, I've got to have the people and the things out there in order to play with, to go out and discover with. All these types of ideas all fit under constructivism. That you are not alone when you learn a language, that you need other people. Some other issues involved with constructivism. One idea is one concept is the interactive discourse. that students are going to learn more, that people are going to understand the language better with some type of interaction with other people. So you have a discourse, you're not just reading text, but you have an interactive discourse between people. Another concept involved in this constructivist approach is the sociocultural variables. That you don't learn just language in a group, you learn within a group that has a specific culture or socioeconomic background, and that those things can aid in language learning. In fact, some of it's necessary, right? We have cooperative learning. I'm no longer going to be competing, but language is learned when you cooperate with one another and you do things like negotiate for meaning and try to help one another out. Discovery learning is another concept that comes in here. You go back to Piaget. And you allow students to learn by letting them go out and play with things, letting them go out and finding their answers, rather than simply dictating to them what those things are. And then we have the construction of learning. And I mentioned to you before about this. I remember I said the sentence, I have a banana. All right, I have a banana. And then you have to take that idea, hear it, and then rebuild the sound. Basically what they're saying here is that we construct a reality of understanding, and we do it in group. We do it in a group so that we're building our own learning opportunities. Some teachers believe that it's good to allow students to create objectives for a class. That way they're constructing their goals and they're learning that they're going to be doing. Also, you're going to give them opportunity to build that so that they will learn some concepts from this field. Okay, well, you've got these methods, right? You've got your structural behavioralist. You've got your generative linguistics, and you've got your constructivist ideas. And all of them are very different in their approach, and all of them are very different in their ideas for how language is learned, and it's going to have an impact on how language is taught. So, for example, in the years ago, they had something called the grammar translation method, and they would literally give you text, and you were supposed to translate it to the other language. Or they would give you text in the other language, and you were supposed to translate it into your language. And that was a language class. Skinner and his group comes along, and we have another way of learning language, which is the audiolingual method. And the audiolingual method, you simply listen and repeat it. Your teacher would say something in French, and you would repeat it in French. And you might have a variety of games where you do things, but there's no reading, there's no writing, you don't write anything down. You simply listen, repeat, listen, and repeat. Okay. Next method here was the direct method. And in the direct method, you walked into the classroom and no language was spoken except the one that you were learning. So if you're learning Spanish, day one you walk into the classroom, that's all you get is Spanish. Your teacher's not going to speak English at all. Your teacher will bend over backwards to try to explain something to you, but it will always be in the target language, in Spanish in this case. This is a very legitimate way to learn language. It's a very good way to learn language, but it also causes a lot of stress in people who want to understand and don't. So a good language learner is going to be one who lives with ambiguity. The direct method is even used by some teachers here on campus. And like I say, it is a very useful way of learning language, but it also creates stress for some people. Nowadays, the phrase that pays, the phrase that is being used a lot in language teaching is the communicative language teaching, where the focus is not on being inundated it's not being inundated with the language, or it's not just listening and repeating. The focus is on the ability to communicate with somebody else. Okay, and again, the ability to communicate with somebody else is this last philosophy that we're now using, and they do use the need to have the generative linguistics types of ideas, but included in that is the need for the other. And so communicative language teaching now emphasizes communication. So they will focus at some point on structure, they will focus on lexicon, but the goal that they're trying to focus on is the ability for people to communicate. And that's communicative language teaching. that's it for this chapter. I do know there were a whole bunch of things that we went through here, so I do hope you listen again. For next week, you're going to want to listen to Chapter 2. There are questions that you do have to post on the boards. And please remember that you should start creating questions for your interviewees so that you can prepare to talk with them. You may have 5 questions, maybe 10 questions each, so please don't make yes/no questions, okay? And then after you write the questions up, you'll need to want to write up a little summary of what, not only the questions, but a summary of what your experience is. Keep notes. Okay, you're going to post them on the online journal because you want to use those for when you write your final paper. If you do have questions, please get a hold of me via email or Skype, maybe even Gtalk or Facebook. You can always call me as well at the office if I'm there. I'm usually there on Mondays and Tuesdays. Have a nice day, and we'll see you on the boards.